Good morning, everybody, and welcome to week number 3 of our semester. So, I hope you enjoyed the 3-day weekend. I am aware of the problems that there were in D2L over the course of the weekend. In fact, I received several emails from not only you, but also from the IT department. So, if you had trouble uh, logging in, or if you had trouble doing anything on D2L over the course of the weekend, that wasn't you. You weren't doing anything wrong. That was the website itself that was malfunctioning. But I have been assured by the IT department that everything is fixed and that you should be able to move forward in your work. Also, a note, I got emails from a couple of students saying that the bookstore sold you the wrong books. Now, I can't blame you for that. That's not your fault that the folks at the bookstore can't seem to give you the right books. So, I won't be penalizing any late postings. Now, several of you have done your postings, and I will grade those pretty much later on this week, hopefully. And it will take me a little more time to grade this first posting than probably the rest of them, because some of these postings I'm going to have to say something like, okay, well, this is why your grade is so low, and I'll usually say something like, if you want a higher grade in the future, do this. So this first week's postings I probably won't be able to grade as quickly as I will the postings later in the semester, because of the fact that it's the first posting, and I'm going to probably need to give you more input on those than I will in future ones, assuming, of course, that you follow what I say on these first postings. All right, so that's the postings, that's the textbooks, that's the website. This week we're doing the French Revolution, and you may be asking yourself, well, gosh, Mr. Smith, why are we looking at the French Revolution in a British literature class? To which I say, very good question. I will tell you. The people of England were watching the events that were going on in France very, very closely. They were really interested and in some cases worried about what was happening over there. The French Revolution, there's a slideshow in your D2L that will explain the French Revolution to you in more detail. But in a nutshell, what happened in the French Revolution is that the aristocracy, which was the King of France and all of his dukes and earls and whatever the titles in France were at the time, and the clergy, which was basically the representatives of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly the priests, the bishops, the cardinals, and people like that, accumulated almost all of the wealth in France. Now, we say that there's an income gap here in the United States, and the truth is that there is, but in France, it got to a point where the people the peasants and the working classes and the blue-collar classes got to a point where they said, okay, enough is enough. So they overthrew the king and overthrew the churches, and they beheaded King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, who really... Louis XVI wasn't really that bad a guy, but he just wasn't a very good king. And a lot of the problems that were going on in France at the time were rooted in the kings that came before Louis XVI. But Marie Antoinette, on the other hand, really represented the excesses of the wealthiest classes, while the poor classes were starving to death. And there's very famously a moment in French history, which really didn't happen, but the tale goes that Marie Antoinette was being dressed by her maids in the castle and saw the people outside rioting and said, well, what's going on out there? And the folks said, well, these folks can't afford bread. To which she said, oh, well, then let them eat cake. Nobody can verify that really happened, but that's the story that represents why Marie Antoinette was beheaded a couple of months after her husband was. So she was kind of a representative with her excesses, with her fine clothing and her lavish parties. What was wrong with the differences in wealth between the rich and the poor? And so the French Revolution was to make a correction in that. And it started with the storming of the Bastille on July the 14th, 1789, and ended with the beheading of Maximilien Robespierre, who had conducted something called a Reign of Terror. In this Reign of Terror, basically everybody that had money was being beheaded at an alarming rate, and alarming so much that even the French people were saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not what we bought into, this is not what we wanted. And that's probably why England still has a king now, is because, well, another reason is, if you remember the history, they'd already overthrown one king and beheaded him, and then they ended up bringing his son back 11 years later. But there was a lot of debate going on in England. Do we keep our current royalty or do we not keep our current royalty? And this was an issue. Remember, King George III was on the throne during this time, and he was losing his mind essentially. So that's the backdrop. So read that history about the revolutionary controversy, and reflections on the revolution in France, and then of course read so Reflection on the Revolution in France by Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was saying, "Hey, we're doing fine over here in England. All that chaos in France, really, the king and queen don't deserve to be arrested because they hadn't been beheaded yet when he wrote this. They'd only been arrested for treason." So you've got the reflections on what was going on in France, and then Mary Wollstonecraft and Thomas Paine. And if you're familiar with American literature, yes, it is that Thomas Paine, the same Thomas Paine that wrote Common Sense and the crisis pamphlets here in the United States. They're going to write pamphlets disputing Burke and saying, "Hey, Burke is being illogical here." So what I want you to look at is look at the history of the French Revolution first to know the backdrop. Look at Burke's argument that everything in England is fine. We don't need any kind of revolution in England. And then look at how Wollstonecraft and Thomas Paine both counter Burke, and they do it in kind of a vicious way. I always tell my classes that meet in person that this was the 1780s and 90s version of Fox News and MSNBC. And if you've ever watched Fox News and MSNBC, and you've seen how people debate with a lot of passion, there was no television and there was no cable back during the French Revolution. So these pamphlets are how people debated very, very passionately. So this might have been, say, like the Rachel Maddow and the Ann Coulter of their time, if you will. And I say that knowing that Burke and Paine are both men, but perhaps one of them could represent Bill O'Reilly and the other one could represent Al Franken or something like that. But this is a very important thing. It's political debate. It's essays. It's not short stories or poetry. But it's important to know that as we debate today, and just past weekend we just had a Democratic presidential debate. That was after having a Republican debate last Thursday, I think was the night that occurred. So within 3 nights, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, within 2 nights of each other, I guess. We had some serious debate here in the United States. Debate is nothing new. Political debate is nothing new, and passion's getting riled up, and people resorting to insults if that's the case. And you'll see that both Wollstonecraft and Paine personally attack Burke, which is what we call the ad hominem logical fallacy. But they also attack his arguments at the same time. So pay close attention to that. Do your posting. I believe there's only one posting for this week. Get that done on time. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me either through email, dropping by my office during my office hours, or call my office phone during the office hours.